Sydney, thanks for joining me on the SteadFast Running podcast.
Thanks for having me.
You're the first coach that I've spoken to for the podcast that coaches for McCurdy trains, and you're also a two-time Olympic trials qualifier. The 235 you ran at Grandma's last year qualified you for the trials in Orlando, and although your 232.38 PR was set back in 2018, you did PR in the half at Philadelphia last year. So, who is coaching you right now, and where are you at in your training?
So since then, I have set a marathon PR and another half marathon PR. I ran CIM in December, and I ran 231.07. And then 3 weeks ago, I ran the Mesa half marathon, and I ran 112.0 something. So yeah, I'm coached by James McCurdy, the founder and head of McCurdy Trained. He's been my coach now since I left the Hansons in winter 2018, 2019. It's kind of blurry, somewhere in that like December, January, heading into the trials of 2020.
Sorry about getting your PRs wrong. I definitely don't want to take away any of those seconds that you worked so hard for, and minutes.
Well, they're really recent. They're like in the last 3 months. But yes, Grandma's was the best race experience, and getting this like the only goal that day was to OTQ. I'm like looking, you said that, and I'm literally like looking at the picture from the finish, from crossing that Grandma's finish line. So it's always like right there, because that was one of those things where I went, I got there on that day with one goal only, and that was to OTQ.
Why don't we go into that a little more? How much did that race mean to you? And maybe it was because you had been struggling up until that point, and it was a breakthrough for you. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but can you go into that race and why you look back on it so fondly?
Yeah, so when I qualified for the 2020 Olympic trials, it was in my very first marathon. Everything was exciting and the possibilities seemed endless. And I got a call like the 2 days later from the elite athlete coordinator of New York at the time, who was David Monty. And he was like, come run New York. Like, we think you're going to be great. And then a week later, I got a call from Kevin from Hanson. They're like, do you want to run professionally? And so things happened very quickly, and everything was very exciting. And then in 2019, it just felt like I was injured the whole year. Like training wasn't coming together. I had to drop out of Boston. I couldn't run a fall marathon. And then I went into 2020 with still a broken foot. I ran the 2020 trials on a broken foot. And at the time, my coach was James then. We decided for me to drop out of that race, thinking I would save my body for a late spring marathon like Boston or Grandma's. I would just drop out of the trials, not risk anything. And then I'd run Boston or Grandma's. I was already in the field for Boston, so it made sense. And then the world shut down, and that didn't happen. And it was like, I felt like I was robbed of that like Olympic trials experience. I felt so much shame for not finishing that race and missing out on, just saying I had completed the Olympic trials marathon. And then from there, we had COVID, and sorry, my dogs are being really loud. From there, it was COVID, and then races weren't really happening. And so I kind of trained myself back into the ground, and I was injured again by the fall of 2020. And then my mom died that same fall of 2020. And emotionally, and that put me in a pretty dark place with like, I was injured and my mom had died, and my personal life was in shambles. And so to turn around and get healthy and OTQ at Grandma's, it was just like not a redemption thing, but more of just like reminding myself that like I still want to be in this sport, and that I belong in this sport, and that it's not over. Like it wasn't over. So yeah, grandma's was very special. And I was probably, that race did not go the way that I like thought. I dropped all my bottles. I missed all of my nutrition. It's the first time I'd run that far with no fuel. And so it was definitely a like, oh my gosh, like please just get me to the finish line situation. But it was very special to like see my coach at the finish and hug him, and he knew everything I had gone through and how much I wanted to prove that like I wanted to be on another Olympic trial starting line, and how much I wanted to prove that like I still had unfinished business in the sport.
You said that you trained yourself into the ground. Is that something you have a tendency to do, and having a coach might help you, might keep you from doing that?
Yes, I think it can go both ways though. I think at first James didn't actually know how to, especially when you have a coach that's not with you in person, they will let you get away with a lot of things because you say, I'm good, I'm good, I'm good, I feel good, right? Like you always feel good until you don't feel good. So I think on some level in the early stages of us working together, he had to figure out how to tell me no, that's not appropriate. You don't need to do that. So I do have a tendency to do that. I think a coach is very much necessary for me because I will run until I can't. I will push until I can't. But it took a while to develop a rapport with him where he felt comfortable saying, that's enough. Like, I needed someone to hold me back for sure more than anything.
Now, my guess is that you are a high mileage runner. So when we talk about your training under Coach James McCurdy, how much mileage do you typically run these days, and how do those miles break down throughout the week?
I found that if I go over 100 miles a week, I tend to get injured. So unfortunately, while there are a lot of elite women out there that I know or I'm aware of or say they run in the 120 to 140 range, I have yet to find that my body can handle that. So I do stay between 80 and 100. I top out at 100. It's really like as soon as I go over that, I feel a shift. I can tell I'm riding a line it's not worth riding for me. Um, Typically we run doubles. I run about 14 to 16 miles a day. We run doubles most days. So it's like 9 in the morning, 5 in the afternoon, or 10 in the morning, 4 in the afternoon. And I find that it works for me. The breaking it up, giving my body a little bit of time, works for me.
Yeah. Now, how would you compare your current setup with the time you spent working under the Hansons? And I'm not sure exactly how that came to an end, or if we can talk about that even.
Yeah, the training when you're with the Hansons, you're definitely like you're in person, you're part of a team. You show up to practice every single day, 8 a.m. You run with the same people every day. Kevin is there for every single workout. He's observing you. He can read your body. He can tell when you're tense. He can tell when you're tired. He can tell. So there's a lot, I guess there's a lot of benefit to having your coach present, because I think he can pick up on things a bit better than when someone's just looking at like data on an app or your Strava. Um, the mileage and the training is very similar. I would say in general, it's all like I joke that like training is just like another chocolate chip cookie recipe. Like we're all putting in the same ingredients roughly, and as long as you have all those ingredients, you're probably going to come out with a pretty decent cookie. Like so I would say like my training doesn't look too different. There's a lot less flexibility with the Hanson program because you have a team. He can't really be super flexible. Like typically we work out together. There's just like that. There, I guess there's a bit more rigidity there. But there's a lot of benefit to having your coach present and seeing your body, seeing your form. They can read, like there have been times where he's like pulled someone out of a workout and said, you're done. Because he can just tell that they're like, it's an off day. They're like pushing too hard. And I know there have been times where if James had been present for my workouts currently, he would say, you're done. And that's like definitely the difference between having a coach present and not present. And then my time with the Hansons ended mostly because of my personal frustrations with the situation and the injuries I was going through. I went from being a very independent adult with a full-time job, teaching elementary school, having my own home, to basically reverting back to a collegiate lifestyle where someone controls your every move and moment in life, and your coach is your landlord and also your boss and also like a mentor slash dad figure. And it was like, I don't think it worked for me to, I think when you're coming straight out of college, you don't know any better. Like you don't know any different. You like welcome this like structure. But I think for me, I went from being like a very independent person to suddenly feeling like I had no independence. And also running being my whole life didn't work for me either.
Got you. Yeah, it sounds like you appreciate the new flexibility that this coaching arrangement affords you.
Mm-hmm.
You stayed in Detroit. Do you enjoy that area, living there and training in Detroit?
You're asking me at the wrong because it is February and I got hailed on my run today. And all my friends in Florida ran in like 70 degrees. And it is definitely the month of the year where I think, what am I doing here? And then spring rolls around and I'm like, this is the greatest state ever. So I love it. I have a great community. I love the Midwest. I love everybody that I've met. I obviously loved it enough to stay, and I bought a home that I'm currently in. But in February and March, I definitely think like, what am I doing here?
Yeah, as a Floridian, I can tell you, well, you know, because you lived here for most of your life. It's hot, it's humid, but we don't have too many hills either. And that's a limitation we have.
That's true. You have to seek, like, you have to just go to parking garages and overpasses, and that's true.
Yeah. When you look back on all the challenges you've had to overcome, the injuries, the setbacks, the change in training environments, the races that didn't go as planned, etc., what would you do differently knowing what you know now that could help other people who might be going through a similar situation?
Oh my gosh, I did so many things wrong from the beginning of like awareness of an injury and denial and deciding like I'm what, just superhuman and I can run through injuries other people can't. You have a stress fracture. That's all right. I can still run through it. Like the things that we tell ourselves, because unfortunately, a lot of injuries, we're all tough. We're all a lot of us runners. We are very tough. We we wouldn't be good at running if we weren't tough, and like just good in the general sense. Like most people hate running, so I just like me even accomplishing covering the distance of a marathon. You are a tough individual. You push through pain. You look at discomfort and you welcome it. And so when an injury happens and it's like, if I can still run, like, yeah, it's uncomfortable, it's painful, I'm not enjoying this at all, but I can still do it. So you like just, I think this idea that like, no, 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 I'm just going to keep pushing because that's what I should do, that like mentality of, um, I don't know, I guess I'd call it deny, so a mix of like being in denial and also thinking that like I'm tougher, I can out tough something. If I could go back, I'd be like, so many of my injuries could have been prevented if I had taken time off at the onset. If I had taken 3 days, 5 days, I could have saved myself months. But I was stubborn, and it's like you feel that pain, you feel that sensation. You're like, that's not right. And instead of being like, let me just give it 3 to 4 days and bike and do something healthy, it's like, nah, I'll still do my workout. And you then, before you know it, you're like limping and you can't put weight on something and you're like sentenced to 8 weeks in a fractured walking boot. And all because you couldn't be patient for 5 days or 3 days or, so I think for, if anything, if I could change anything, it would be at the initial onset of like, ooh, something doesn't feel right, listen to your body. Like 3 days isn't going to kill you. 10 days isn't going to kill you. 8 weeks is going to ruin your season. Coming back from 8 weeks off you'll be lucky if in a year you're where you were before. Coming back from 10 days is like, you'll be right where you were within 2 weeks. So probably my biggest lesson was just like not trying to push through injuries. And then also that workouts are not meant for proving anything. Like workouts are designed to get you stronger, sure, but like you're not trying to prove you're ready to do some things. Like I think so often I took workouts as a chance to prove fitness instead of to gain fitness. And that often leads to that like trying to beat the workout, trying to prove you're faster than like your coach thinks you are or you want to be, and you're not meeting yourself where you're at. You're instead trying to force yourself to be somewhere you might not be yet. And then you'll either end up overtrained or injured that way. So those are probably my two biggest ones. And I still struggle with them. I mean, I think everybody does. You can hear it a million times and you'll still make the wrong decision.
Yeah, those are great tips. I've struggled with that too, pushing through injuries. And I think for me, it was that I'm addicted to running. And maybe even in an unhealthy way, there's a dependence to that. Like, I don't know what I'm going to do today if I can't run. That's just me being honest.
Mm-hmm.
Or if I stop training, I'm going to lose fitness and I'm going to lose all the progress that I've made, even though we know that a few days isn't going to set you back all that much.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, you're right. This is something we all go through. So then looking several years into the future, is the goal for you to keep having fun, keep placing as high as you can in the races that you enter, and extend your running career as long as your body will allow?
Definitely. Yeah. I'm not exactly sure where I see it going beyond what you said, fundamentally continuing to have fun. I think making sure that running continues to be joyful is the number one goal. Um, I have matured a lot in the last 4 years with letting go of this attachment to results and remembering that if I'm not having fun, I shouldn't be doing it. Like I need to take a step back and re-examine what has happened. Because I only got into this sport because it is my number one love. It is like truly, like you said, addiction is definitely the right word for it, but it's also like addiction, passion, it's such a fine line, but it is the thing that brings me the most joy and gives my life purpose and makes me feel sane and it makes me believe I can achieve anything outside of the running world as well. So I think just continuing to find joy and explore the limits of my body, um, healthfully.
Well, you kind of anticipated my next question because you've had a tremendous amount of success as an elite runner. And I know success is relative, right? Some people who are much slower than you are looking up and saying, "Wow, she's so lucky," and then you're looking up to other runners who have reached milestones you'd like to reach. But putting that aside, putting all that success, those outcomes to the side, does going for a run every day and just putting your best foot forward, as so many of us do, regardless of our status in the running world, you said that that gives you meaning and purpose. So what kind of meaning, purpose, or fulfillment does that simple act of going for a run, what does that add to your life?
I think on some level, not like remove running for a second. On a day-to-day basis, we rarely get to feel success daily. Like you're not always feeling like you're building towards something, like in your career, in your job, with your family. Like you don't always feel like every day is like a step forward. But every day that I get that run in and I finish that run, I feel better. I feel like I've made a step forward. So like regardless what happens with the rest of my day, I've already done that thing for me that makes me feel like I'm moving a step forward. Um, so it is the thing, it is my source of accomplishment, achievement. It's the thing that like makes me feel like, yeah, I did something today that was hard. And it's definitely not always easy to get out there. Like I got hailed on today, so I was like, this sucks. But you finish and you're like, but I did that thing, and now bring on the day because I can do anything.
And just like training helps us become better runners, I'm sure you've adopted a similar work ethic when it comes to your coaching. So let's get into who are the people that you are coaching and what is your process for every day getting a little bit better as a coach?
Ooh, that's a good one. To start with my athletes, what my roster looks like. I coach everything from a 2 hour 35 minute well, 2 hour 35 minute marathoner to a 6 hour marathoner. So there really is no set profile. I will say the majority of my athletes are women who have returned to the sport post starting a family, a career. They're refinding their place in our sport. They're typically balancing children, like a full-time job, um, and their goals are. This is truly the thing that they do for themselves and themselves only. It's the only time of the day that they set aside just for them, where or it's also social for them. It's probably like where they're, they make bonds and connections with like their social friends. um a lot of my athletes are between the age of probably 35 and 70. I coach quite a bit of masters athletes. As far as becoming a better coach every day, I can definitely say, like most things, I definitely don't get better every day. I love that to be the case, that whole 1% better. I wish. I definitely have days where I feel like I failed. I have days that felt like I missed a connection, or I missed something, or I dropped the ball, because you can never, like teaching, it's very similar. You can never do enough. You can never, there's always, when you're dealing with people and interpersonal relationships, and there's always more. You could always be better. So I think I actually have tried to give myself a lot more grace of like, I can't beat myself up if I'm not perfect. So I think, for me, professional development in the coaching world is just like being the best communicator I can be. It's getting my athletes to feel positively about themselves and to feel inspired and excited by running, to make sure the relationship with running stays healthy, um, to be a good listener. But I stay on top of, like, I read a lot, so I stay on top of like the science of our sport. Um, but that's probably it.
Oh, that's a good place to start. At McCurdy Trains, is there like an emphasis on coaching education, or is it like, hey, once you're with us, we trust you, you're here for a reason, and and they let you run with it?
James is like really, his like process of bringing a coach on is a very long process that does involve getting certified. He encourages multiple coaching certifications, and then through his like own mentorship, it can take up to a year to like have your first athlete. Um, for me, I came on very early in the McCurdy business model, and I was a teacher and educator, so I had a lot of the communication side of things and the working with people stuff already down. And then my running career, being a collegiate athlete, and then currently when I joined McCurdy, I was a professional athlete with Hanson. So I think my process is a little different, but he does continuously. We have like coaching Zoom calls. We talk about what's working, what's not working. We like bounce ideas off each other, in regards to like when athletes hit plateaus, or like how do we change the stimulus, or he'll send out um, articles or things that he thinks are worth, like, are valuable to read, to like help with assisting our athletes. But I would say it's not structured. It's more just like a general community. The coaches are a community, and we kind of work
Gotcha.
together that way.
When you think about how us coaches create value for our athletes are coming to us for various reasons, right? Some of it might be accountability, or just they don't know how to structure training and they're looking for some expertise. Are you finding those common threads as well in your experience coaching others? What do you think? Why do you think people are reaching out for coaching in your case?
I do see like themes. I have athletes who come to me because they have been experiencing success. They're starting to feel very excited by their potential. They're motivated, but what they've been doing is kind of haphazard, and they would like to just hand the reins over to somebody. Um, they know that they can get better, and they just want to not, they're scared of injury, or they've plateaued a little bit and they're not seeing the same improvement they saw initially. Um, or they really just don't want to make those decisions for themselves anymore. They want somebody to tell them what to do. They want, another theme are is the athlete who needs training that's going to be adaptable, and their life is crazy and they don't want to make those decisions. They need somebody to tell them it's okay to move that workout. It's okay to cut the cool down. It's okay that while you're on vacation, we're just going to maintain our base and run, the minimum number of miles you can that your schedule allows. And so those athletes are really looking for just like someone to tell them that like it's okay that life is crazy. Training isn't perfect. Like no training cycle is going to be perfect. And then you have the athletes that I do think just want like companionship, like a social part, like someone to talk about their running with, someone who's excited about their running, like the camaraderie of like this. Maybe in their life they train alone, their family isn't really involved in their running, and they just want somebody who appreciates the work they're putting in, someone to say like good job, I see what you did, like I know how hard that workout was, like I can see the like work you're putting in, and like you deserve, all the high fives, but they're out there at 4 a.m. in the dark and nobody's telling them good job. They get home and their spouse is like, thank goodness you're back. Here's the kid. Like, there's like our sport. If I think there's a book about it, it's like titled Little Visible Glory. And I think that's such a good definition for like our sport. So often we do it in the dark of the night with nobody watching and nobody cheering and nobody helping you get out of bed and nobody telling you good job when you get home. And we're still out there grinding. So I feel like those are my three kind of categories.
Wow, I think that's the best answer I've heard to that particular question. And just so our audience knows, I did not give these questions out in advance to Sydney. So, how would you or your athletes describe your coaching style? And by style, I mean, how do you relate to your athletes when you are being your most authentic self? And how is that reflected in the expectations that you set from the very beginning?
I wish you could ask them this and they could just tell you for me. um, I think that they feel that I hope that at least I'll say I hope, and I've had some feedback that I've heard from like the reviews they give my coach, um, that they just feel very supported, and that my athletes feel like I truly want them to enjoy this process. I only want that I success is defined by whatever they define it as, and I just want to help them get there. And I want to be their cheerleader and their support system for that. I never want them to feel any pressure from me or any disappointment from me. Like it is very much I FaceTime almost all my athletes once a week. So I set that as a precedent from day one that like I want to see your face. I want to have a conversation about how you're feeling. I don't want to just look at numbers and make assumptions. Like I want to talk to you. What is going on in your life? Because if you're moving, if you got a new job, if your kid has been sick and home, like all those things affect training. And so I think I put a lot of effort into getting to know my athletes as people and understanding like truly why do they run and what are they here for, because if it's most of them, like while they sign on with PR goals and race goal, I want to be Q, I want to do that, that's never going to be what keeps you in it when things start, when it gets tough, right? Like those are nice to have, those goals are great, but like that's not really why you're getting up every day. Like you're not getting up and running when before work when the weather's atrocious because you want to be at Boston. I mean, I'm sure that's a great goal, but you're doing it because there's something intrinsically, there's joy that you're getting or satisfaction or something that running is giving you that goes beyond that goal. And so just making sure I stay connected to my runners and that they're experiencing that joy and fulfillment regardless of like where training might or might not be going. It's important.
Yeah, it sounds like you're establishing that personal connection, and like you said, it takes a lot of time, it takes effort. You're building a relationship from scratch, and I know personally as a teacher, which for me as a teaching is a passion, um, sometimes I have to set boundaries because it can consume you. It can take over your life. Do you also try to set boundaries between you and your athletes?
I did find that by having the weekly FaceTime calls, it allowed me to set more boundaries around communication because otherwise it is overwhelming when you have 50 adults who will text you every day if they don't know that they're going to talk to you in person. I mean, in person, virtually in person. Um, I think the calls remind them that like if it's not that important, we can talk about it when I see them. Because otherwise my phone will go off from like I have athletes in Korea and Japan and California, and it's like my phone would go off from all 24 hours a day. So I do think the weekly calls were both a method of like, yes, connecting, being able to create more of a personal connection with my athletes, but also being setting the boundary of unless it's an emergency, we can talk about it when we talk. um, so that was kind of a win-win plan for me.
Based on your experience, Sydney, how can a coach help a runner become mentally strong? Let's assume that that is the deficit we're dealing with. Because, of course, we all suffer from doubts. We might have certain mental blocks that get in the way of achieving our best performance. And I think maybe just having a coach that you can trust, and if there's that buy in, that alone goes a very long way, right?
hmm I think there's a lot of like this is multifaceted for sure. It's not the same for everyone because you certainly can't. Mental toughness is something that takes a long time, and you can't. It's not something you can force on anybody. It has to happen so organically. But I have found different methods that have worked. Some is you truly build a rapport with an athlete to where they believe you believe in them, and then you give them workouts that they think they can't do and you tell them I believe you can do this, and then they go do it and they surprise themselves and they do it, and through many of those experiences they start to think I'm stronger than I think I am, like, and if she believes I can do it then I probably can do it, and through that they ultimately start to believe in themselves as well and they don't rely on me to say you can do it. They start thinking I've got this, right? Sometimes it is a little bit more of a not letting them make excuses, like kind of turning the flashlight around and being like, okay, but really? um, and that's a little bit more delicate. Like you definitely have to be more delicate with, when an athlete is making an excuse, or I'll get a text at like 6 a.m. that says, the weather is garbage, whatever, can I move my run to tomorrow or something? And I have to actively choose, I'm not going to respond because if I do, they want to opt out. They're looking for that opt out, right? And I'm like, but if I just don't respond, 9 times out of 10, they'll go out and do it because they're afraid of like, they don't want to disappoint me or they don't want to like have to explain that they wimped out. And then they're like, I felt so badass out there, like they end up ultimately proving that they could do things that they couldn't do. So, um, yeah, I think mental toughness is built over a long series of proving to yourself that you are tough. Because it's natural to think I can't, right? Like that easily, the negative thought is the easiest to come by.
Do you ever feel like you're holding back something that you need to say or want to say, but you're not going to say it because you know that that's not what the person wants to hear? And let me just give a little context to this, because I coach a handful of runners, just a handful, and I don't charge them anything. And I feel like because I don't charge them anything, that gives me a little bit more freedom to say things that maybe upset them a little, but it's what I think they need to hear. But if you have a paying customer, maybe there's this feeling like maybe I have to treat them a little bit more delicately. I don't want them um, to to be dissatisfied with my service, if you will. Do you have that conflict as well, or are you just the type of coach that's like, look, if I need to say something, I'm gonna say it?
It depends on the person. There are people who, pay for this service that don't want to be told things they don't want to hear. And on that level, when I remind myself it is a service industry and they didn't sign up to be told, I don't want to hear your excuses. They're not, they've signed up to have somebody say, it's okay, you can move that run, or it's okay, you didn't have time, or you didn't prioritize running today, or, it definitely depends on the athlete and their goals. I believe someone is very serious about their goals and we are on a timeline and they're making choices that are like interfering with that goal, it is my responsibility to say, okay, but understand, like, let's return to why you're here, like, why you're doing this. Like, you have this set goal. You can't miss long runs in a marathon training block. You just can't. Like, do you want to adjust your goals? Like, there are definitely like honest conversations that are hard to have that you can have with people when you know where their motivation comes from. But I definitely have not said things plenty of times because I think I don't want to upset this person. I, you know, they're mentally maybe not as stable as you would like them to be. So, um, yeah.
I feel you. Yes, I know exactly what you mean. Well, let's take a hard left here. We're gonna pivot and talk about training now. Because earlier you said you do like to read about the science of running, and I'm one of those running nerds too. So training is something the coach has a little more control of, right? But figuring out what we need to tweak for an individual athlete can sometimes, at least at first, elude us or be a puzzle. So let let's start with um, rock solid first principles. Can you give us a few very broad ideas around training that can get most people started down the right track?
Mm, well, definitely don't go from 0 to 100. I think the biggest mistake I see runners make that are doing it on their own is they sign up for a marathon and they go from like 0 to 100. They go from running their like 30 miles a week to I need to be running 60, 70 miles a week. That's not sustainable. You might get away with it for a few weeks, but it's not going to work. So I would say the general theories that I have is, whatever is working for you right now, we're not going to deviate very far from it. Like, if a new athlete is coming to me, they've been running 30 miles per week. We are not going to suddenly run 50, 60, even if that is going to benefit them in like the long term. I do believe that distance running, it is a long-term development game that we're playing anyway. So while the goal might be to reach 50 to 70 miles in 3 years, we're going to get there in a way that's like safe and sustainable. So no big jumps in mileage. If you increase volume, you can't increase volume and intensity at the same time at the same rate. It's too much. You either need to spend a phase to increase volume safely, and once your body has adapted to that volume, start introducing intensity in the form of quality sessions or workouts. To do both at the same time is just too risky. You can maintain the athlete's current volume and change up the intensity, increase intensity, that's fine. It just depends on their race goals. If they're training for a 5K, 10K, sure, keep their volume the same, add in the intensity, that sort of stimulus. If they're training for a marathon, probably need to first build up their volume to some, an acceptable level, and then start adding in the stimulus. I mean, a marathon's 99% aerobic or whatever. So those quality sessions, those workouts aren't as valuable as they are if we're training 5K, 10K. We need to get lactic. We need to work on your VO2. And so that'd probably be a general rule. I do try to follow the 80-20. I make sure that the quality is not beyond 20% of an athlete's total volume. Oftentimes I stay quite a bit below that, especially for my marathoners. If you're a master's runner, you need more time to recover between workouts, 3 to 5 days, depending on how intense the workout was. If you're, in that 30 to 50 range, you probably need you still need 2 days of recovery between hard workouts. Speed sessions, I believe in like the mesocycle. So every 3 weeks you're stronger. If you think you're going to be a better runner next week, I mean, if you're just starting out, maybe, typically not. Typically you're going to start to feel a bit worse before you start to feel better. Every 3 weeks you should feel stronger though. You should be able to say, I couldn't have done that 3 weeks ago. So I try to remind my athletes that, like, if you are really tired, if your legs the workout felt hard, if you're feeling fatigued, look at what you've done in a 3-week cycle. Have we done more in the last 3 weeks than where are you at in that mesocycle? You're probably in like a high fatigue part of that cycle. You haven't quite realized the benefits of the workouts that we've done yet. And give it another 7 to 10 days, and you're probably going to feel back on top of yourself again. If not, then we need to re-examine what we're doing. Why are you so fatigued? Why are you not recovering properly? Long runs take 2 to 3 weeks to realize the benefits from. So like, don't expect just because you crushed your long run this week, that next week's long run is going to be better. It's probably going to be worse. If you crush this week's long run, you're probably going to feel like garbage on next week's long run. It's just scientifically, you're still recovering from last week's long run. So, I think less is always more. I've never heard somebody say, I regret taking that day off. Never in my life have I, in all of the athletes I've coached, in the 15 years I've been running, I have never, ever heard someone say, man, I really regret taking that rest day. I definitely hear people say they regret going for that run, doing that workout, pushing that last rep. You never hear somebody say, I regret, cutting the workout short, or I regret, taking it a bit easier, or pushing the workout a day. That doesn't, typically those things they pay off. And then the last one would probably be, I had it in my mind. It was about, no one has ever said I started that race too slow. I've never heard somebody say I should have started faster. So I think if you think that you're like, I always like remind my athletes, like, there is no such thing as starting a race, too slow. There's such a thing as seating yourself too far back and getting stuck weaving around people, but you'll never say I started that marathon too slow.
That's right, especially the marathon.
Yeah, I mean, I guess a 5K, you run out of road, so maybe, but I don't coach a lot of 5K runners.
Well, first of all, very well said. I just have a couple follow-up questions to that. When it comes to progressive overload, you said, you can't make these big jumps. Do you ever have someone come to you with a marathon on their schedule? It's 3, maybe 4 months down the road, and you look at what they've been doing, and it might not be the best idea to tackle this marathon. Are you trying to talk them out of it?
Yep, I've definitely been there. And I've said, this is super risky. You're not going to be ready. If you truly want to have a good experience, if you want to enjoy this marathon, like, you need to pick a different marathon. You need more time. And not once has an athlete listened to me. So they're like, I'm doing it. And I agree, I go along, but I'm like, but I need you to hear me say this, that it's probably not going to feel very good, and that the risk of injury in this cycle is high. And we are not going to be running 20-mile long runs because we can't get there and we just don't have the time to get there. So yeah, you can have those conversations, but typically they've already paid for it, they've signed up, their family's coming, they have a hotel, and it just happened. I have an athlete who I've literally been working with now for 2 years, and he signed up as a Michigander for the Miami Marathon, and he had 3 weeks to get ready. I mean, 3 months to get ready, and his longest run thus far had been the half marathon he had just run. It was his first half marathon 3 months before. And I was like, you're not only going to go run the hottest marathon in February in a state like hot, humid marathon. We live and train in Michigan in January and February. But also, your longest run of your life is 13 miles. And we have 12 weeks. um, he called me after and was like, that's the hardest thing I've ever done. It was horrible. But he said he didn't regret it. So
That's a difficult position for you to be in as a coach. For me, it's a deal breaker, but I have that flexibility. And I don't want to be responsible for someone getting hurt. I mean, I've been hurt and I don't wish that upon anyone.
mhm.
Okay, so let's say you're going to start coaching someone, you've gathered as much information about them as you can, you've got that target race on the calendar. Before you start to write any workouts, do you conduct any sort of testing, whether it's physiological testing or time trials or races, just to get an idea of what their current fitness level is?
Fortunately, like a lot of athletes sign up having just raced. Like they just did this half marathon or they just did their first marathon. And because of that, they have now signed up for their second marathon. And so I feel like almost all my athletes have come in with a very fresh, recent baseline. Like I know where they're at. If for some reason that is not the case, when they sign up, their last 6 weeks of training populates into the calendar, so I can go in and look at all their like previous workouts. Also, if they have Strava, I can do this too, and kind of see what they were doing. I look at kind of heart rate levels. Um, we go off of what their perceived easy pace is, and then I usually tell them I'd like to race something between a 5K and a 10K within 4 to 6 weeks. Um, and that's kind of like where I start with that, because I'm not just going to throw them into a race knowing nothing and not being able to give them any sort of preparation, not knowing where they're at or knowing anything. um, but it is rare that I get an athlete that didn't just race.
Yeah.
um,
Okay. And then when you work backwards from a race, as a programmer, you're thinking, okay, I'm going to have this block here, I'm going to have that block there. So when we talk about periodization, do you have an overall periodization scheme? Let's say for the marathon, where you've got 16, well, not, let's say you have a little bit more, 24 weeks to train. What are the different phases of training that you like to categorize things into?
I think an athlete either comes needing one of two things. They need a period to develop their like aerobic base and their volume, because they're coming from, maybe they've been injured, or they've just taken a break and their volume's been pretty low for a month, or they just ran a marathon and they're going to take their downtime. Their history depends a lot on how I would tackle the periodization. If they haven't done a lot of speed work in the past year or two, they haven't devoted time into developing kind of those gears, that like third, fourth, fifth gear, we're definitely going to spend 6 to 8 weeks working just on speed, turnover, strength, drills, hill repeats, strides, a lot of that like form, economy, power, VO2 stuff. before we start transitioning into, the threshold and aerobic tempos, just for the sake of one, they haven't developed that in a long time, and two, it will help make threshold and aerobic tempos feel more comfortable, like relatively. Um, it's really individual. In an ideal world, sure, you spend in a 24-week window, you spend 4 weeks kind of just with some aerobic base, some strength training, strides, hills. Then you'll spend 6 to 8 weeks doing a lot of VO2 work and start put tape like sprinkling in threshold work towards the end of that. Then you'll have 8 weeks, 8 to 10 weeks of threshold slash marathon specific work, and then a 3 week taper. And that's kind of your bread and butter, cycle.
Yeah, that's exactly what I do. It's like a reverse nonlinear periodization style
Mhm,
of training. It's definitely not the traditional linear pyramid, right?
mhm,
Because you're working in all kinds of paces, just emphasizing some more than others in a particular phase of training. And
mhm.
then towards the end, towards the peaking stage, you've got your most specific work. Is that right?
Yes, I would just say the last 3 weeks that like so you peak with your most specific work about 3 weeks out for the marathon specifically, because after that you're really not doing any more of those super long those workouts that take a long time to recover from. And in that 3 week taper, you are sharpening. So you are kind of getting that turnover back, doing some of that more like relative speed work in. You're doing the stuff that makes the legs start to feel good as you take the load off. So I would say like you're at max specificity 3 weeks out. And then you kind of on the other end, as we're deloading the legs, we're also kind of bringing back in some of those speed workouts that we did early on.
Now that's really interesting to me. Could you give us like one or two examples of a workout that would fit into that 3 week period just to sharpen up a little bit? Would it be
Um,
something like 400s at 5K pace, or is it something else?
I love 200s. I love like 16 by 200 with a 200, jog. It's like it's fast. It's fast, but it's not taxing. You just feel, especially for a marathoner, you don't often get to feel that fast. So it's great to see that fitness kind of come around and get on the track and get the legs like really turning over like that. And remember that, like, oh, I'm fast. Like 200s are really fun. Um, I feel like good sharpening workouts are always mile repeats at kind of marathon minus 20. So you've been running marathon pace, marathon pace, marathon pace. So taking, marathon pace minus 20 seconds, 25 seconds, you do some mile repeats on like a little bit shorter rest. That's a good like sharpening workout. 600s are nice because nobody likes 800s and no one really likes 400s. And the 600 is kind of right in the middle where my athletes are like, what's a 600? It's like, don't worry about it, just do it. They're not too long. 800s can, especially for our like, the 4 hour marathoners, 800s is still a long time to be at interval pace. So a 600 feels a little bit more approachable. You're looking at 2 minutes. Um, Fartleks are great in that sharpening period of 1 to 2 minute bouts at like VO2 interval pace with like a floating or like light jog in between. um, those are really nice to help start feeling getting the legs moving.
Even though we are talking about the peaking phase, I'm not even going to ask you about the taper unless you have some really strong convictions there, because the taper is so variable, right? Specific to the person. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think you really only get to taper if you're a high volume runner. Unfortunately, like it's a very unique experience for someone. If you are not running more than 60 miles a week, your taper is not exactly the same. You're not dropping quite as much volume. You're not going to feel that same kind of, the effect is not quite the same. I found with like, I have a lot of marathoners that run between 35 and 45 miles a week. So they're always like, I can't wait to taper. And I'm always like, I hate to tell you this, but you don't really get to taper from 30 miles a week. You can't run nothing. So I will say it is very unique. And I've done some of my best races on no taper and some of my worst races tapered. I think it's a science I haven't quite, and there's so much of a mental side to it too that I would say it's highly individual and it comes down to what an athlete feels, what makes them feel good and ready.
Okay. So you're still not sure what kind of taper works for you best?
I know what works for the marathon. I am struggling with the half marathon and the 10, like the threshold, everything from 10K to half. I seem to, my legs don't feel good when I taper. They feel flat. I start to feel like I've lost my fitness for nothing. And when the gun goes off, I'm finding that like I don't feel good. And in the marathon, the taper makes you crazy, but I believe in my taper. Like I believe that it works. So I think I have that like firm, regardless of how I feel, I believe in it. So it doesn't really matter how I feel. Whereas with the half and shorter distances, I'm kind of still on the fence.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense. Now, volume and intensity. Those are the two biggest, in my opinion, the two biggest levers that we as coaches have to create the training load that we want to be working under at any particular time. So let's take volume first. How do you assign volume and decide how it gets distributed throughout the week, and how are you manipulating it up or down over time? And I can explain that better if I need to.
I think I understand the question. I don't have a lot of say in the sense of my athletes come to me with, I can run X number of days per week because I have childcare, I have these issues, I have these. So, and then it's like, and I'm training for this distance. And so then we have a conversation about, okay, how much time per day can you give me? And it might be weekdays. Like I have a principal as an athlete, and she's like, I cannot run more than an hour on a weekday. It's just not possible for me. And she also has an infant. It's like, and I cannot run more than 4 days a week, or my husband will kill me because we share the morning duties, right? So it's like in a lot of ways she's limiting me, and like sure we could do more, but that, I mean, like in an ideal world she'd be able to do more, but I'm limited by like what truly like she can do. So typically finding an athlete's volume and their schedule is working around like what is possible for your life. And then I find that if they start to, things can shift. Sometimes it's like, oh, I can find that extra. I can find that fifth day, or if I fit it in here, like based on how things are going with training, or if it's for a very short period of time, like in these next 6 weeks, if we could get one more day, that would be ideal. It's not forever. I'm not asking your husband to do this forever, but for 6 more days, 6 weeks, we could do this. So I find it's I'm often being like, I'm given constraints and I work within those constraints.
If you do have someone that's running 7 days a week, and for their easy runs, they're already up to an hour for their easy runs. This would obviously be an advanced runner. Um, would you consider adding some more volume into their workouts at that point, or would you rather tack on some more easy mileage?
It depends on what they're training for. Um, how often a week are they working out? This is a hypothetical person.
It's a hypothetical. It's just that in my philosophy, like I don't like prescribing for regeneration for an easy day anything more than 60 minutes, 60 to 70 max. And if I feel the runner is prepared to handle more volume, I would focus more on volume at intensity.
Hmm.
So, adding an extra rep or an extra mile at threshold pace on a quality day rather than stress them out on a day that's supposed to be easy.
Do you find that the athlete would prefer the more easy miles than more intensity?
Yeah, in fact, I was one of those, right? I love just going for long, easy runs, and I thought I felt like at one point I was getting diminishing returns from that though.
Hmm. I would say like I never run more than my easy days are 70 minutes. They're always 70 minutes, 70 in the morning, 35 in the afternoon. Um, with the exception of this cycle, I have one day a week that's a 15-mile easy run. That's my easy run. It's not a workout, it's not my long run, it's just a high volume easy day. We'll see how that plays out. I've never done that before. That's like new to my cycle this cycle. I can see where it comes in because one of my complaints with my coach in the past has been that all my long runs are quality. And so they're broken up in a way. And I'm not getting that like long aerobic stimulus that I'm looking for. And so this is a way to add in an extra day of that like 2 hour, hour 45 to 2 hour stimulus. Most people obviously do not have a random 2 hours on Thursday to do that. But if I were to say like best bang for your buck, you have an athlete who wants more volume, but it doesn't want it in their intensity, they probably don't need it. They're like, how about we instead like you don't have to increase the volume of the intensity, just increase intensity. But they're probably a mileage junkie if they just want more easy miles.
Right. And you have to be careful with the injury risk there too, right?
I have very few athletes that run 7 days a week. In fact, even like my top female athlete, I make her take one day off every 21 days at least. Like, I just don't think that, I don't think anyone should be running 7 days a week every week. Just get in the pool, ride the bike, like chill.
All right, let's take intensity. How do you like to determine, prescribe, and evolve training intensity? Because I know some coaches like the heart rate monitor, some prefer pace, some are using lactate readings or power meters, and some use all of it, right? So where do you stand on that?
Cool. It's so muddy. I actually hate all the data. I hate how like ridiculously confusing we've made it. The lactate thrust like testing is appalling to me. It's like makes me cringe when I see it. Like we're really gonna start testing our blood in bathrooms in between reps. Like that seems absurd to me. I still rely heavily on pace, but my athletes and I talk. I drill it into their heads that that pace is purely a suggestion. It can be, you could be 10 or 20 seconds off based on weather, sleep, hydration, fueling. Like we are never running to hit a certain pace unless we're in a marathon specific segment, in which case marathon pace is, I'm a kind of a stickler about pace. And I do pay close attention to their heart rate at various efforts. Like I tell them ahead of time, like they know the parameters. If it's a threshold workout, I don't really want your heart rate getting above this. And it shouldn't be lower than this, or you're not truly working in that zone. Unfortunately, wrist heart rate is unreliable. So unless they're willing to wear a chest strap, it's oftentimes I'm relying on their feeling. So I'll give them like, this is the effort I'm looking for, like 7 out of 10, 9 out of 10, 5 out of 10. Um, I found that at the end of the day, like we're not talking about the top 1%. I don't coach the top 1% of runners. If they get out the door, I trust my runners are putting in their best. They're going to put in their best effort. They're going to give me what they have on the day. They're going to do their best to get the workout done because they want to. And so I trust them. Like if they're just getting out and doing it, like they're going to get better. I tell them over and over, like you put in the work, you show up, you do the workout, you're consistent, we're going to get better. Like we're not nickel and like we don't need to be so specific. we're not trying to like win world championships here. We're just trying to improve and see how good we can be. So I think all that data is too much.
Yeah, you do have those athletes that overanalyze, or if you give them a pace or even a range, they're going to try to hit it on the dot, and they're going to feel like a failure if they don't.
Or they have to
I
do
Yeah. Now you said you use heart rate. I've resisted using heart rate for a really long time because it's not a perfect method, and none of these are perfect. But let me ask you, how do you determine max heart rate for someone so you can create their zones?
Oh, I don't get that specific. Um, it's more like historical data on a scatter plot for that person. You start to like, I look at every workout as like, and every easy run is just a dot, like it's one data point, and we really can't start to make generalizations until we have enough of that data. Because I don't think max heart rate, I don't think those formulas are very useful. I have athletes that are like, I look at their heart rate, I'm like, that's not even possible. Like that defy like logic. And it's like, but that's their normal. And so like I have to operate off of that. So for the most part, when I'm using heart rate data, we're looking at like, I need months of data for really to like feel informed with a lot of those like guidelines.
And you're matching it to their RPE, right? To their rating of perceived exertion.
Yeah.
You want something.
And what it is on race day when we're actually like truly, in theory, they're giving it their best effort.
Earlier, you said that you're a big advocate for 80/20 training. So be what would fit into that 20%? Can we talk about VO2 max workouts and a lactate threshold and acidosis tolerance, or anything else that you would fit into that 20%?
I consider anything up tempo part of that 20%. The only part that gets a little bit gray for me is long runs. If they're just like easy aerobic long runs, I don't necessarily count them into the 20%. Um, because otherwise that would take up all of more than 20% for a lot of my athletes, like volume. So, in theory, they say like what VO2 max work shouldn't take up more than like 6% of your total volume. Maybe it's 4 to 6%. I mean, I have the various formulas and stuff. I truly don't think it's that science. I don't think we have to be that nitpicky about it. Um, but I think marathon paced work is part of that 20%. So, if you have a 3x3, but it also depends on the athlete, because a very slow athlete, marathon pace is their easy pace. So in that case, it's different for that. It's different for that athlete. For me, marathon pace work is intensity. It's part of my 20% because it's not that far from my threshold and not that far from my VO2 phase. They're
Right.
all close together. Um, and then also like cross training can be part of that 80. If you have like an injury prone athlete or a master's athlete, like one of my athletes only runs 4 days a week, and two of those runs are quality, and his ratio is definitely not 80/20, but he cross trains a lot to make up for the volume his body can't take running. So in that sense, like we're following the 80/20 principle, but his 80% isn't running. It's not all running. Um, I know that's not really a very specific answer, but I'm not a very like, I don't follow a book or like formulas really.
No, I think that's a great answer. I just want to dig in a little bit more. Let's use in your case, right, where your 80% is truly easy. So for you, what paces or what heart rate ranges would fall into that 80% where you're just recovering or going at a super easy conversational pace?
130 to 145 would be like my easy heart rate.
Okay.
I think any lower than that, am I really running? I'm probably running too slow. Any higher than that, and I'm wondering if I'm maybe stressed or dehydrated, or it could be really hot out, or it could have been windy. But in general, all my easy runs fall between 130 and 145.
Okay. And on a good day for you, is that like maybe 2 minutes slower than marathon pace or even slower?
It's about 90 seconds.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's good steady training. And you're probably one of those types of runners that can recover well from that stimulus.
I think if you've just like built up my running economy is, going to be better than the average person. So running is very not stressful on my body. Whereas, if you're early on in running and your mechanics aren't great and your economy isn't great, any amount of running is stressful. Like we've all felt it, even those of us who are very maybe talented or, we've invested a lot of time in running. When you come back from injury, there is no such thing as an easy run. All runs are hard. They all feel hard. And it's like, it's a joke when you're like, oh, it's just an easy six. Like, there's nothing easy about it. You haven't run in 6 weeks. It's like, it feels hard. That always reminds me that for some of my athletes, there is no such thing as an easy run. Running is still actually hard for them. And I have to remind myself of that it's not. While I have easy runs, I look forward to, I float along and it takes nothing. It's not stressful on my body. I have athletes that their easy pace, their heart rate is like still 170. I'm just like, it's just they're in a different place.
And what are signs and symptoms for you that tell you that you might be overreaching a little and maybe it's time to pull back? Is it maybe like you're not sleeping as well, or a workout that you would normally knock out of the park is abnormally difficult for you to execute?
Yeah, it just happened today, actually. I just had a horrible workout today. The kind that goes the wrong direction and gets worse and worse as you go on, despite the fact that you're giving, like, the effort you're putting in is not matching what you're seeing. And it like forces you to think, okay, there's something, I'm either overtraining, I need to back off, like I've dug too deep, nutritionally, did something go wrong? I definitely, if a workout that should have come easy is hard, there's one time, not a big deal. A string of them, start to be concerned.
Yeah, as coaches, we're always looking for those patterns, right? It's not one bad workout that concerns you.
Hmm.
All right.
And there's like,
Well,
do you believe in the rule of thirds? Do you follow that?
remind me because that sounds very familiar, but I don't remember right now what that is.
There's like an Olympic coach who used to say like your training should follow the rule of thirds. Like a third of your workout should go really great. A third of your workout should just be like, I got it done. And a third should go poorly. And if you're hitting that ratio, you're doing something right. So if they're all going really well, you're either like your goals aren't high enough, you're just like coasting through training. If they're all going poorly, something's wrong. And if they're all in the middle of the line, well, I don't know. I guess you're probably not going to develop. You're probably just going to kind of stay where you are. But I always like that. So I'm like trying to tell myself today was one of my thirds.
Yes.
In the bad third.
Yeah, because you're gonna have days where I have athletes tell me, "Oh, I'm feeling so sore today." Well, that's part of the process,
Hmm.
right? It's not gonna feel great every day.
Hmm.
What would your advice be to someone who is a few minutes away from qualifying for the trials? Because you crossed that threshold, right? You're at 231, so you have that cushion. Let's say someone has run 240 and they're in that 240 to 245 range. And I know this is just general advice, right? But can we give out maybe some benchmarks that they can aim for, whether it's race time benchmarks, like maybe you should focus on breaking 75 minutes in the half, or maybe it's a training benchmark, like try to build up over time to doing a 30K progression run with the last 10K slightly faster than marathon pace, for example. And that's just something I thought of right now.
Those are both good benchmarks. I would be curious to what their training looked like leading up to that 240 or so. I literally just had this happen because my best friend, also I coach her, um, Ari ran 242 over the summer, and we needed her to run the OTQ at CIM. So she ran 242 in May, and we needed to break, 237 by CIM. Um, and so we had to look at like, how are we going to make that? How are we going to achieve that? Like, what do we need to see in training for that to happen? And both of the things you said were true. We had to focus on getting that halftime down. Her PR in the half was from the marathon. So it's like, if your PR, if you haven't run 118 in the half yet, how in the world are you going to run 236 in the marathon? So we spent the summer developing speed, and we ran the 10K. She PR'd in the 10K. We ran a few halves. She finally got to 118, 117, 30 in the half. And those were great benchmarks to see from a racing standpoint. But even more important, because the half is closer to the mile than the marathon, was I needed to see her put in large chunks of work at goal marathon pace and for it to be comfortable and for her to do it on tired legs. And so that meant like we needed to run 13 to 14 miles, 13 to 16 miles at goal pace on a high volume week to simulate those last 13, 14 miles of the marathon. We see there's so many men who can run 61 minutes in the half, but they can't run 202 in the full. They can't even run 210 in the full. So we know that the half only means so much. There are definitely obvious rules. If you can't run 118, you can't run 236. That's just a fact. So I would say there's like a series of, things that you're hoping to see in that build leading to that next marathon. But the biggest thing is that you cannot force something to happen. You can't just decide I'm in 236 shape, so I'm training for that, even though you just ran 242 or 240. So it is kind of like meeting yourself where you are now with this plan of where you want to be, but not trying to think that like, okay, 2 weeks out from your 240, I'm now going to train for 236 because that's where I want to be. It's like, that might be where you want to be, but that's not where you are. And so you're either going to be very frustrated that you're not going to be able to execute workouts that a 236 marathoner can execute. And you're going to end up injured, frustrated, mentally exhausted. So I would just say, never forget that you can't force fitness. You always have to meet yourself where you are. And then, with that trajectory, like, how am I going to get to where I want to be?
Yeah. Your debut marathon, you ran that in 232. Would you say you came into that race with a bias towards the strength side, the aerobic strength side, and maybe your limiting factor is the speed side of things? Is that fair?
It's still true for sure. Definitely. I'm like, what I can't remember which training book calls us this, but we're like the aerobic monsters or something. Those of us who are just naturally more slow twitch, more economical. We just do well at the longer distances because I'm so much better at the marathon than a lot of women who have half PRs I can't even touch. Like I can't even dream of running. Right now, I'm like running 110 feels like impossible to me. And there's a lot of women who have run 110 who haven't run 231. So
And does this mean that once you're aware of a weakness like that, that you should go all in on improving your under distance performances? Like maybe you should set aside 6 months just to train for the 3000, right?
mhm.
That's kind of random, but or and this is debated all the time between coaches, should you stick to what you're good at? Should you stick to your strengths?
James has tried to talk me into foregoing a marathon in favor of a full season of speed. It's not easy to swallow. Like, I'm going to go choose to race in a setting I'm not going to be as competitive in and do workouts that I'm not comfortable with and are painful. And um, it's a hard sell. I think it would benefit me. I don't know. I don't know for sure though, because I haven't done it. I did spend the summer working on speed. I had a lot of fun working on the track. I did PR in the 10K. It did lead to a PR in the half and did ultimately lead to a marathon PR. But I think I would have run faster in the marathon if I had just focused on marathon training.
Yeah.
If I'm being honest, I don't know.
Well, Sydney, I could talk to you for several more hours, and in all fairness, you could write a book. There's so much more you could say on these topics, and we have limited time. But would you like to end with a little rapid fire segment like we do on every episode?
Sure.
Okay, so I have 4 questions here. Just try to answer them in 1 sentence or less.
Okay.
I won't hold you to it, but let's try.
Okay.
Number 1, something we didn't talk about today that you would find in one of your training plans or that is just as important as the workouts themselves.
Positive self-talk.
Number 2, what are you most excited about right now as a fan of the sport?
Kipchoge running Boston.
Number 3, if you could only do one race over and over again for the rest of your life, which one would that be and why?
The New York City Marathon. There's no place like New York.
And number 4, if someone told you that you could have anything you wanted, but you'd have to give up running, would you do it? And what would you ask for?
An airline ticket that never expired that you could use to fly anywhere in the world any day you wanted. You could hop on any flight free, no cost. That's probably the only thing I would trade running for.
You love to travel?
I do, yeah.
Yeah. Well, Sydney, this has been a great conversation. How can people follow you or reach out to you for coaching if they're interested?
I'm on Instagram as Sydney T. Devore, and you can sign up for coaching on the McCurdyTrain.com Get Trained for me or any of our, great coaches.
I will leave those links in the show notes. And once again, Coach, thank you for inspiring all of us through your running and for being willing to share your knowledge and help others through your coaching and through podcasts like this one.
Thank you so much for having me.
For Sydney Devore, I'm Jonathan Mederos, reminding everyone to train smart so you can keep doing what you love for a long, long time.